Hello and welcome back once again. This is Scott and we are going to talk about QNAP LXD Container VLANs Part 2. This presentation is a follow-up to the previous one in which we learned how to use LXD containers from the LXC command line interface to create containers in specified VLANs. Although we focused on how to do this in QNAP Container Station, this technique works for any Linux system hosting LXD containers. Last time we included a command line switch to run the LXD container in privileged mode, since this is required on the QNAP. This time we're going to cover additional switch settings. So, more on VLANs and addresses. Consider putting all of your self-hosted applications that you offer on the WAN on a dedicated VLAN. Last time we set our LXD container to use a DHCP address. Most applications are better suited to having a static address. Rather than setting a static address for each container, I suggest a DHCP address coupled with a DHCP address reservation on your router to achieve the same thing as a best practice. Here we are at the command line once again, and we're going to SSH back to the QNAP NAS. We're going to quit out of the menu, and we're going to return to a shell prompt on the QNAP NAS. Now, just as a reminder, at this point, if I do a LXC list, I don't have any LXD containers. I went out and deleted the last container that we had created. And if I do a LXC profile list, I have the default profile and I have the VLAN 100 profile that we had created. So here we are at the Unify software controller. I'm going to click on the gear. I'm going to go to Networks, and we can notice that we still have our test VLAN operating at VLAN 100. Let's go ahead and create a second VLAN, and we're going to call this thing Test2 VLAN. And we're going to set this one to be VLAN 110. And we'll go ahead and set its address to be 192.168.110.1 will be the gateway with a 24-bit subnet mask. So you don't have to set the VLAN number to be identical to the third number in your IP address. It's just that I kind of consider that to be a best practice, and many other people in the industry do as well. So let's go ahead and click Update DHCP range, and our DHCP range is from 110.6 to 110.254, just like it was in the 100 VLAN. So now we click Save, and now you can see we have a test VLAN on VLAN 100, and we have a test2 VLAN at VLAN 110. Back at the QNAP command prompt, we're going to do LXC profile create VLAN 110. And we're going to do a LXC profile list. And now we have two additional profiles, VLAN 100 and VLAN 110. Just like in the other video, we're going to make the same or a similar change to the profile VLAN 110, and we're going to set it for VLAN 110. We now have a command line that says LXC launch Ubuntu version 2004. We're going to call the container test 100. Again, we're going to use as the basis profile default and add to it profile VLAN 100. We're going to turn on privileged mode for the container because that is a requirement in QNAP. Then we're going to set the memory limit to 2048 megabytes or 2 gigabytes, and we're going to set the CPU allowance limit to up to 20% of the host CPU. And we're also going to set auto start to on in our container. So we're going to create this container, and there it goes, creating it. Now we're going to go back and edit the same command, and we're going to create a test 110. And we're going to use profile VLAN 110 with the same settings. So now we have two containers. If I say LXC list, you can see test 100, and you can see that it has an IP address 192.168.100.249, and you can see that test 110 has an address of 192.168.110.177. So the one for VLAN 100 is operating on the 100 network. The one for VLAN 110 is operating on the 110 network. Here we are back in Container Station, and you can see that I have a LXD container called test 100 and a LXD container called test 110. If I look at test 100 and I do settings, you can see that auto start is turned on. You can see that CPU limit is set to 20, and you can see that memory limit is set to 2048. Under advanced settings, network shows up blank because Container Station has no way to recognize the VLANs like we talked in the last video, although they are working. And then when we go to device, you can see that there's a check mark in the run containers in privilege mode because this is a requirement that QNAP has in order to operate correctly in Container Station. So if we go back to the overview, and now we look at test 110, and we do settings, you'll be able to see that its auto start is set on, its CPU limit is also set to 20, its memory limit is set to 2048. If we go to advanced settings and we go to device, you'll see that it's also set to run containers in privileged mode. There's one other important difference that Container Station has. If we look at this LXC container here, the LXC container, if we look at settings and we look at advanced, has a MAC address that it will get every single time. Because when we went off and created the LXC container, we had to click on the option on the right side to make it bold, which really meant to use that MAC address persistently every time the container booted up. And also notice with LXC containers, we're setting the address inside of Container Station, whereas with LXD, we're using the dynamic address, and also there is no option to set it within here. So another interesting thing is that if you go on to LXD containers, although you can't see it, there's no option to change the MAC address, because when we create the LXD container, by default, it will choose the same MAC address every time. And as it turns out, that's an advantage for us because a consistent MAC address for our container is what we require in order to be able to set DHCP address reservations on the router. Here we are back on the UniFi controller program, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Clients. And I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of the client listing. And there we have test 100 running at 192.168.100.249. And we have test 110 running at 192.168.110.177. So right now, these are DHCP addresses, but we can click on one of these on a unified network, and most other routers will provide the same type of capability. We can click on our gear here, and we can click the plus next to network, and it has the option to use a fixed address. If we turn that on, we can set this fixed address to any address that we're not currently using. And then every time that container boots and the network notices that MAC address online, it will always assign it to the same IP address. And that's how I do it for my self-hosted applications. The primary reason for that is because it centralizes one place for address management, meaning the router. Whereas if I set static IPs within each server, I would have to maintain those separately. Now, if we go to test 110, similarly, we click the gear, we click network, we click use fixed address. I can type in anything I want here and do a save. I'm not saving those simply because they're temporary test machines. Okay, so in summary, we added a VLAN 110 to the network on the router. We added a VLAN 110 profile for LXC at the LXC command line. We created 2 Ubuntu 2004 LXD instances, one in VLAN 100 and one in VLAN 110. Both LXD instances use the same physical network adapter on the QNAP, and we added switches for auto-starting the container at boot time, and a switch for a memory cap, and a switch for a CPU usage cap. And we learned that LXD Mac addresses are persistent, and using DHCP address reservations on your router for LXD container instances is a best practice. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like, and we'll see you next time.